Good afternoon and welcome to the latest Consumer Duty Alliance webinar, where we will be looking at the changes to retirement planning which are likely to result from the government's decision to include unspent pensions in the IHT regime from April 2027. I am your host for today. My name is Fiona Tate and I'm the Advice and Compliance Director for Retirement Specialist IFA Intelligent Pensions. I'm also a member of the Retirement Income Task Force, which is one of the working groups within the Consumer Duty Alliance and unsurprisingly looks at retirement income. As I'm sure you know, one of the main aims of the Consumer Duty Alliance is to share best practice so that we're all in a position to deliver the best outcomes to consumers at every stage of their lives. And that's why we're here today. The transition into retirement in particular has always been one of the most difficult financial challenges, and the constant change to legislation certainly doesn't help. In this webinar, we're going to look at the proposed legislative changes, the potential solutions for clients who are likely to face bigger or brand new IHT liabilities. We'll be looking at the role of guaranteed income, and we'll be looking at the impact on retirement advice going forward into 2027. In order to accomplish this, I have been joined by representatives from two of the UK's leading retirement income providers, Just and Legal and General. You've probably noticed from the slide that they are both called Martin, which is just there to make my job difficult, and I'll be using their full Sunday names all the way through, so we'll be very formal today. Martin Lyons heads up Just's team of retirement and later life specialists. He's a very well-known face at advisor training events and conferences across the UK. According to his LinkedIn profile, he has 35 years experience in life and pensions, the last 15 years of which have been spent with Just. Personally, I am convinced that he has a portrait in the attic somewhere, which is gradually aging over time. Martin Chester joined Legal and General in May 2024, and he also has 30 years experience and his own portrait in the attic. He is part of Legal and General's retail annuity team, and he helps advisors around the UK to navigate the evolving retirement landscape. So welcome to both Martins this afternoon. Today's session will be broadly split into 4 parts based on the learning objectives which were laid out in the invitation. I'm going to kick off each section with a question which will be answered by one or both of the presenters, and then it will be followed by questions. In the interest of keeping to time and making sure that we stick to the subject, we're asking you to submit your questions via the chat box. We don't have a hands up emoji, so if you put it in the chat box, I'll keep an eye on that and I will send it Martinward at the end of each of the 4 sections. We're going to do our very best to address as many questions as possible, but I'm anticipating that there'll probably be quite a lot. So we may have to group some of them together, and it may also be necessary to defer some, particularly if I know they're going to come up in the next section. Finally, please remember that we are recording this presentation, so if you don't want us to say anything about any of your clients, then please don't raise that in the questions because it will be broadcast to everybody else afterwards. Okay, so let's get going. We know that the legislation is not in place yet, but we've had confirmation of some of the changes. So I'm going to ask Martin Chester to kick us off by telling us exactly what is in scope and what we, if there are any areas that we're not yet sure about. Martin.
Thank you for the kind introduction, firstly, Fiona. We're all clearly aware of Rachel Reeves and Labour's headline of pensions falling into the scope of IHT from April 2027. And the consultation period in the background ended on the 22nd of January this year. And the relevance of that is further information has been coming out pretty much piecemeal over time since there, and there's more to come. So, for example, death in service benefits were confirmed as being excluded, which is a good thing, I believe, in July of this year. But what's clear is the new legislation will undoubtedly create a fundamental shift in the UK's estate planning landscape, with the 1.6 million households currently paying IHT, jumping to 5.1 million, according to Transact. And in addition to the 38,500 estates currently paying more than they do under the current rules, a further 10,500 estates will pay inheritance tax for the first time. Next slide, please. So what's making headlines? So clearly IHT is referenced daily in the financial press, and this is also becoming more commonplace in the mainstream educated press and will continue to do so as we get nearer the date. Research suggests 79% of advisors are already discussing implications with clients. 64% of advisors are spending more time improving their own understanding of the shift in IHT framework, and 43% are disappointed they don't have all the answers on the subject. Nigel Lawson, the ex-Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer, once said, "Inheritance tax is a voluntary tax. You can either do nothing and volunteer to pay for it, or you can take steps to avoid it." I want you to keep in your head spending with purpose. We're going to reference that as we go through. But on to the key changes, because what is clear is clients will need a tailored approach ahead of IHT on pensions. So in August, we had the announcement that unused pension funds will be included in the estate and taxed at 40% if the estate clearly or obviously exceeds the IHT threshold, which is pretty brutal, was most commentators' opinion on that. And clearly from 2027, discretionary status will no longer shield pensions from IHT. In annuity land, guaranteed minimum payment periods and value protection death benefits will be included when passed to non-spouses or non-registered civil partners. There's a clue in that, which I'll come back to in a second. And another key headline is pension providers must supply valuations within 4 weeks of notification of deaths, and personal representatives will also be required to report those valuations. That is not so straightforward in practice, as many of you will be aware from experience. And us as a company, we've expressed our concerns about the practicality of this deadline in our formal response back to HMRC consultation. Next, please. So how might these IHT changes affect retirement planning conversations? Well, firstly, there's some good news. Transfers to a spouse, civil partner, or registered charity remain IHT free as today. And there's, the second point, joint life annuities will not be subject to IHT, ties in quite nicely with the first point. So normal exemptions would apply in this world. And then personal representatives, so executors of wills and estates, must report the pension values, as I've mentioned, but settle the IHT ultimately within 6 months of death. And if I come back to timeframes here, again, that could be challenging. If you think about trying to get information from perhaps an old direct sales organisation who are no longer open to new business, not as easy as pressing a button on a platform and getting an instant valuation. So legacy companies, some smaller companies, perhaps more stereotype, generally speaking, it's not as easy as it sounds. It's also estimated a quarter of UK adults don't even know who their current pension provider is. So that's not going to help. Next, please. So what is clear, IHT changes will increase the need for advice. So this is, good news for the advisory market in terms of clients will need to support your support. And clearly the traditional advice to spend non-pension assets first and preserve pensions for inheritance will need to be revisited. We all know that pensions has been the best IHT solution since the last 10 years of pension freedom. So there'll be changing orders of deaccumulation, etc., which we'll allude to. On a practical note, clients may need to draw pensions earlier to reduce the size of their taxable estate, and we're already seeing evidence of that. And on basic level, at review, you need to ensure a client's expression of wish forms are up to date. Consider spouses bypass and transfers to maximise normal IHT exemptions. there'll be other associated problems come out of this. So if you think of a SIPP, which might hold a commercial property, obviously that's not liquid, so that property would need to be sold on death. So that's going to create a time lag by definition. And a part of your practical discussions is discussing how the IHT will be paid. Will it be from the estate? Will it be by the pension? A pension scheme can pay if it's more than 4,000 or more, or by the beneficiaries. Disappearing from the UK doesn't get rid of the problem either, because expatriates, they're still subject to UK IHT if they leave. So clearly other trusts or tax efficient wrappers for non-pension assets will come up more and more.
Thank you very much, Martin. We do have a question from Jack Silverstone. He is mentioning that, I'm paraphrasing slightly here, but leaving money to a charity is impossible if you have a spouse in place. Is there any way around this?
I'm not aware at this moment in time. Obviously, if you do leave to charity, on a practical note, it's not answering the question. 10% or more of your estate, your IHT percentage rate could be reduced to 36%, but that's perhaps something we could pick up separately, unless Martin L knows something that I don't.
No, I think it's probably best to take it as an offline later, but yeah, it does seem that there's a bit of an issue there, because many people, and we keep seeing these things asking people, are you going to leave this various charity, something in your will, etc., cancer research and things like that. So I think it's something that is a thing that people are considering. So yes, it's it does seem a bit of a tricky one, that one.
Yeah, good question.
Jack has just clarified he meant leaving all or part of the fund to charity. So I think what we've covered, I think the short answer is that we'll have to go away and look that up. But certainly I know in my experience there are bits and pieces of legislation that kick around on the basis that is very historical, that us poor ladies, if we're left on our own, are completely incapable of looking after ourselves. And so you guys need to be forced to do something for us. Sorry if that sounds ridiculously sexist, but that's, I think, how legislation kind of developed over time. One question I've been asked quite a lot, actually, is, okay, so we've got all these changes coming in with the current government. I think we're pretty sure now it's going to happen. What do you think? I'll start with Martin Chester. What do you think the chances are when the next lot get in that they'll just change it all again?
Well, a really good question. Obviously, Labour's proposals, this, and I'm stereotyping to a large extent here, but it won't affect a more typical Labour voter. If you think of the sort of people who traditionally vote Labour. Conservatives, encourage private pension funding massively. It'll be interesting to see what they do if they do get back in. And then we've got Reform in the background, who I think might. This is not a political statement or view at all, but I'm sure they're going to be in the mix somewhere, who's perhaps got more of a conservative bias, obviously with Farage leading the party. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But like everything in financial service, we've got to run with what we know at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the recent tax-free cash speculation has really underlined that particular issue. Martin Lyons, did you want to add anything there?
No, and only in the sense that I think everyone's got the same maths problem, whichever way you look at it, whoever's in. Yeah. I mean, that the amount of wealth in the UK that is owned by the over 50s, over 60s is, as we know, disproportionate part of society. The only issue is that it's tied up in property and pensions, or much of it is tied up in property and pensions, which, we could go back and talk about, the Taxation of Pensions Act from 2015, and did that try to answer some of that particular conundrum in terms of, kickstarting the economy, and of course, people unwittingly paying too much tax on withdrawals that they were taking. But essentially, that is where a lot of the wealth sits. So what other levers another government might pull is anyone's guess, really. But yeah, it's very difficult without a crystal ball to see what the other proposals might be.
It is always very difficult to second guess, and I think we'd all say to advisors, don't do it if you don't, if you can avoid it. But that does lead on nicely what you've said there, Martin, one of the behavioural changes that's likely to come from this particular change. There's much more incentive for people to actually take money out of their pensions earlier than they might have done, which is almost certainly not an inadvertent consequence of the legislation. So given that is likely to happen, what sort of things would people be doing with that income? And we know that basically handling inheritance tax, you either want people to spend it or give it away, or come up with some way of actually paying that particular tax bill when it arises. And I know there's been a lot of chat about trying to spend things down to avoid heirs having tax charges, but I think most heirs would actually quite like to have 60% of something rather than having their parents spending the whole lot. So that being the case, what sort of planning opportunities are out there? If we look at the first one, which is giving it away, what do advisors need to bear in mind when they're speaking to clients?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I think it is a case of making sure there's no knee-jerk reaction. If you're going to spend the money, then have a purpose for spending it. Because obviously we don't want people necessarily withdrawing too quickly. So that is that fine balance there, isn't it? And as Martin alluded to, perhaps people, will be more tempted to take money out of pensions sooner in the retirement income process rather than later, and perhaps certainly a shift there. But I think it is worth a recap of gifting. Let's remember just remind ourselves what the main rules around gifting are, because if you're actually going to disinvest from your pension fund in order to, in part, to mitigate IHT, there is a certain amount you can give away, of course. And as Martin alluded to on some of the aspects of death benefits, and the same applies here, transfers between spouses and civil partners obviously going to be exempt from IHT in normal circumstances. So you could withdraw from your pension and pass it to a spouse that will obviously form part of their estate. But then you've got the unused nil rate band there as well, that you're increasing that to the 650 on subsequent death. So let's bear in mind we could take money out and pass it over. The other thing with that, of course, is you've got to really strike the balance between that and paying too much income tax and taking it out in the first place. So again, all these things have got to be taken in the round. Obviously, there's other people that you could give some of that money away to, up to £3,000 a year annual exemption, and you can carry that forward for one tax year. So a married couple could then combine those and pay £6,000 or even more if you carried both forward, of course. You could look at that. But I think the one that is, I'll come on to the regular gifting, but there's a small gifts as well. So gifts of up to £250 could be used as a gift, to several people, not to one person every time, but you can make multiple gifts for £250. And then you've got the wedding and civil partnership gifts. So one solution might be convince somebody to get married and you can give them some money. I don't know, maybe that's a speculative comment. I'm joking, of course. But bearing these sorts of things in mind, do you actually remove that from a pension fund? It might be the case for some people. But the one, I suppose, that people are starting to get more interested about is this gifts out of normal expenditure. So gifts out of surplus income. And if you started to produce some of that surplus income using your pension and then giving that part of that away, then obviously subject to those conditions, it's made from that income. It doesn't impact the donor's standard of living, i.e. it is genuinely surplus excess income. They can still carry on doing the things that they were doing in terms of lifestyle and standard of living. Then that would be IHT free as well. So there's a few caveats to that as well. Where the exemption is used over a number of years, it doesn't matter if one of those years there was a deficit, so long as taking one year with another, there was a surplus and gifts were made out of that surplus. So just being careful about those income bits. Obviously, pensions income would be defined as income, but things like if you were using that money out of a bond, for example, the 5% withdrawals would count as capital. And there's an anomaly with PLAs as well, where the interest element does count as income, surplus income, but the capital element doesn't. So there's all sorts of things you need to be looking for there. Documentation, of course. You've got the normal forms, which are IHT 400, 403, things like that. Whatever form you need to do to satisfy that from revenue purpose, make sure those are placed in there. And it may be, just a good idea to document your intention of making those gifts to the person you're actually going to make it to as well. So just to make sure that was all buttoned down. But yeah, you can imagine that people are perhaps might start withdrawing more pensions income they perhaps would have done to establish that pattern of income, and then using some of that excess to pay away and things of that nature. But there's maybe some opportunities that we'll come on to a little bit later on that one as well.
Okay, thank you, Martin. And another thing you can obviously do, apart from giving your money away, if you don't want to do that, is to basically put something in place so that when the tax does apply, that there's some funding in place. And I know, Martin Chester, you've got some thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Please, yeah, thank you. So when you're creating a retirement income, clearly, that's either going to be spent by the client to support their lifestyle or used to make gifts out of regular income, as Martin L has already mentioned. The other thing where we've seen a lot of traction already, and we're using this in presentations with advisors, but some people are definitely doing it. A lot of this already is to fund a whole of life policy as a potential mitigation strategy that can be used to pay the IHT bill or create a legacy. Obviously, you need to put this in trust and to keep it outside the estate. So this is an example of someone who's vesting £100,000 of their hard-earned pension money, 65-year-old, and they're buying a level joint life annuity, 100% spouse's annuity, which gives them 6,768, as you can see there. So just under 6.8% rates at the end of May. If you take basic rate income tax off for that, and 4 out of 5 taxpayers are basic rate in retirement, nets down to 5,414. So putting that annual premium, that pension money, into a joint life, second death, whole of life would generate a sum assured of 330,466. So that could be one way of managing that liability and creating a different opportunity for the client to deal with that. So just bring that alive a little bit more. So there's the premium and the sum assured I've mentioned already. This is for a couple as it's joint life, second death. And this is looking at, is it good value? Because some clients will, say to you, well, whole of life is expensive. So this is looking at crossover of premiums compared to the sum assured. And by 88, which is where they would live to on average, according to ONS, premiums paid would be almost £114,000, as you would see. 92, which is the 1 in 4 chance of living to 92, premiums paid just over £146,000. And at age 96, that's the 1 in 10 who'll still be there at 96. It's just shy of £168,000. So is it good value? I would suggest if you look at the premiums paid at those points compared to the sum assured, that's pretty good value in client terms. Now, we do know there's going to be 3.7 million centurions by 2050. That's on the increase. But I can't see too many of those living to 126, which is the actual crossover of premiums to sum assured, if you follow me through. Next, please. Similar scenario here. Again, someone investing £100,000, 65-year-old again, but this is just a level single life annuity, which, as you'd expect, would be a slightly higher rate. So 7,679 for getting the pence, so almost 7.7%. Taking basic rate tax off again, nets down to 6,143. Putting that into a whole of life again, 269,991. And again, just to look at the crossover, here's the ONS data again. So this male of 65 will live to 85 on average. We do know, obviously, life expectancy is bespoke, but 123,000 odd, just shy of. And the 1 in 4 chance again of being alive at 92, almost 166,000. And again, the 1 in 10 chance, 190,000 just overpaid. So again, it's highlighting actually whole of life as a potential solution is definitely one that should be considered for your clients going forward.
Thank you very much. We do have a question from, actually there is a question from Arena, and I'm going to come back to that one if you don't mind, because I think it fits the next section. And we have a practical question from Nick. He's saying the wider estate can pay the pensions IHT. Can the pensions pot pay the IHT for the wider estate, i.e. the other way round? And that includes any income tax charges that might happen after age 75. Would either of you gentlemen like to take that one on?
Reading it through, can a picture put?
Nobody's leaping at it. I would have thought the answer is that if you take the money out the pension pot, you can do anything you like with it. But I think it would be highly unlikely that you could actually use the pension pot while the money was still in there. I don't know the exact answer, but I think that's probably likely to be the position.
Yeah, there's a really good.
Sorry.
So I was going to say it's worth looking at the debate that was in government with Ros Altman and Steve Webb, and these are the sorts of issues that started to come up around how do you, the mechanics of some of these in terms of where you pay it from, who pays it, and for some people it might be easier to use money that's bound up in pensions, to pay these away. But I don't think that's been clarified as an option at this particular point in time.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think there's 3 basic ways. It could be paid from the estate as a whole, with the entire IHT liability settled, which includes the pension funds before probate application. The pension scheme has the ability to pay 4,000 or more, and can actually use their discretion to pay amounts lower than that as required. And that they must actually settle that within 3 weeks of receiving the request. And obviously, the pension beneficiaries can pay the IHT directly. More commonly, they would be the options that would be considered at that point.
Just quickly, we've just touched on the potential double taxation for clients who are 75. Obviously, in the event of their death, there's going to be an income tax bill, and then you've got the IHT bill as well. Is there any immediate reactions to how people should deal with that?
No, I think that is one of the big anomalies of the system. That you have got that double taxation aspect. Clearly, once you've paid the element you've paid IHT from, you've still got income tax to pay on the rest. So again, I think these are things that by the time we get to 2020, so hopefully a little bit before that, we'll get some more around the mechanics of how exactly how that's going to work. But it does seem rather unfair.
I believe that they have an idea that there will be reclaim processes, but we don't really know exactly when and how. So I think the only thing we could definitely say is, certainly as far as tax-free cash is concerned, if you're not already suggesting that your clients take that out, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a way of avoiding it, put it that way. So, obviously you've got the 40% on the IHT pot and an income tax on the pension income. So, depending on individual circumstances, but, quite commonly, they're talking about an effective tax rate of 67% in some cases, which is not good news for anybody. But, you've got to balance it against the whole scenario for the client, haven't you?
Yeah. As ever, it's always checks and balances, isn't it?
Indeed.
Okay, so moving on to the third section, and I'll come back if I can to things that haven't been answered. We've mentioned that one of the consequences of the legislation is that more people will be taking income. Obviously, we've got 2 representatives from companies that are very strong in the provision of guaranteed income products. So I'm wondering if you could just discuss where you think the guaranteed income market has moved in the last few years, and are there things that advisors should be aware of that maybe the last time they were highly involved in annuities didn't apply? Martin Lyons, perhaps you could pick this up.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's a really good point around, purchasing that guaranteed income via an annuity, for example, and it's taking that, it's obviously there's that subject to IHT, notwithstanding, we'll talk about death benefits later. If there's any death benefits remaining, some of those maybe. And again, it's an interesting point around what that fund would have been had you left it in versus, what it can buy you today. So actually, are you comparing apples with apples? So if you've got £100,000 and it's got a 6 or 7% rate on it, what would that £100,000 have been if you'd just left it in? So would it have been, £40,000, £50,000? So again, just it's an interesting way of looking at things. But just remind ourselves around the rates and what you can get. It's always worth a reminder and update on these, just to compare if people are now starting to look more towards guaranteed income and how they might use that as part of the strategy here. And again, these are not uncommon rates. What I've done is average these over a 6-month period, so we've not picked one particular day. But it's worth noting that even for a 65-year-old in good health, 6.93 is not an uncommon rate over that 6-month period. I think we've got a 10-year guarantee here, but no other bells and whistles. Obviously, you start adding those death benefits escalation in, obviously that's going to reduce, but nevertheless, the starting point is relatively high compared to the last 2 or 3 years, as we're probably all aware. And through underwriting, obviously, that rate is only going to increase. And of course, you've got people who are partway through that retirement journey, 70, 75. And again, you can start to see if now is a situation where they're thinking, hang on, let's revisit this. Let's look at this. Let's draw more income. Maybe I'm going to use some of that income for establishing gifts out of normal expenditure, for example. The rates you can see here are, again, significantly higher than they were even 2 or 3 years ago. And again, it may be using part of that for your own income, part you might establish that gifting scenario, or indeed, as we'll go on to, you might use part guaranteed income and then part drawdown scenario. But again, just to illustrate how much that income, the cost of that income has reduced. If you were looking 5 years ago, £106,000 would have brought you £5,000 worth of income in this particular scenario. A person in those same circumstances today, it would be about £65,000. So again, even if people are thinking, well, I'm going to wait for my fund to recoup before I start looking at guaranteed income, you can probably, it's not going to cost you as much of the fund as it might have otherwise have done again a few years ago. So you can start to see if you've got somebody, with, I don't know, £250,000 fund value, you're starting to look at, £170,000, £180,000 still left in order to have that flexibility for later on. And again, that will change depending on, the underwriting that's taken place. So you can start to see that, the value that guaranteed income actually produces. And I think it'd be surprising for some consumers out there. The other aspect that we mentioned was, there might be something left over, depending on the sorts of shape of benefits that you've chosen. And again, arguably, the shape of benefits is as important, if not more important, than rates, some would say. So even where you've bought an annuity, there is scope still for money to be left for the family thereafter through nomination forms. So looking at things like value protection. So here we've got somebody who's got £100,000 fund value. They've received 6 months worth of income, 3647, and there's £96,000 therefore that they've never seen back from the purchase price. Well, of course, that can be paid to their dependents, to their loved ones, as a lump sum. So exactly the same rules as crystallized funds, death benefits that you'd have under drawdown. So £96,000 goes back to the family. And again, you can see the sliding scale there. Post 75 there, it's subject to tax, as we've indicated in the box there. Now, this will be brought in to the IHT rules in 2027. That's the proposal. So again, there's going to be potentially IHT payable on that if it's going to be to somebody other than the spouse or civil partner. So you've got to watch that one. But again, that's going to be the same under drawdown in any case. So again, it's just an interesting iteration of where annuities have come forward. And again, the break-even point there, 13 years 9 months. So this idea that it's going to take you to years and years to get to the point where you've had that annuity money back just isn't the case anymore. Sub 15 years is not uncommon for that annuity purchase price to be repaid to the annuitant as well. So anything after that is obviously over and above what they've paid in. And again, annuity death benefits, there's a whole range of different things that can be done. Value protection there, as we've just mentioned, but also spouses' pensions, guarantees. You can still have up to a 30-year guarantee period on these benefits, as well as something that might be something that is a consideration. So again, it's interesting, just while we're talking about annuities, to look at the context of that and look exactly what the value is these days, which might differ from what it was assumed to be some time ago. The other aspect, I think, is that people might look towards property, other assets, that sort of thing, but don't forget, you still need to think about what the situation is later on in life. So again, whatever the funding is, if we spend it down too soon, we've got to remember that we might need to hold something back for later life. Things like long-term care. And again, having that option to use guaranteed income in that scenario is also, should be discussed with the client as well. So again, whilst we're talking about annuities will be applicable at each stage of life, and maybe fixed term. Martin will talk about that in a moment. But at that later stage in life, again, just remember the immediate care plan, the immediate needs annuity. So again, here we're talking about not 6, 7, 8% annuity rates, but maybe 20, 25, 30%, maybe even depending on the client circumstances, looking at a relatively short time frame at an acute point of need. So underwriting is obviously going to come to the fore here again. But here we've got a situation where you might use some of that wealth to help cap the cost of care. And protect the remaining capital. So again, an IHT element there as well. What do you do with the rest of the estate in terms of reinvesting that for estate regeneration? The income is tax-free, paid direct to the care home or the care provider. Incidentally, if for whatever reason the client doesn't need care anymore, it can be paid in a PLA type basis. And of course, that the amount you've used for that annuity, that care plan, has been removed from the estate and is guaranteed by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. As with anything, you've got to look at both sides. You've got the risk of capital if the person dies early, but again, you've got 6-month guarantee on there, and of course, you can select more capital protection as an option. It says there it may not match fee increases, but actually, what we find is that people often will negotiate with the care provider to say, look, this is guaranteed. Let's actually cap the ongoing increases. I can actually build in an increase to this plan, and we can make sure that that's obviously going to be payable on time every month for as long as they need the care. So again, lots of things to take into consideration. But I know we're talking about the early part of retirement now, and what can we do now to sort of maybe use annuities early, but let's not forget that there is that place for guaranteed income a little bit later on as well.
Okay, I think there's a couple of questions on annuity death benefits. So obviously, we know that some of the lump sum death benefits will be caught by the new legislation. Do we think that's going to affect people's behavior? Arena's also asking if you have a joint annuity and the spouse decides not to take the full amount and it gets paid elsewhere, would that still qualify for an exemption? I'm expecting the answer is probably no, but if you guys could perhaps expand on that. I'll leave it with Martin Lyons just now, and then we could come to Martin Chester. Okay.
Well, certainly if the income is payable to the spouse, as we've heard, then that's obviously IHT free. If the spouse then nominates it to go to somewhere else, and again, mechanics of that, I think probably would need clarifying. But obviously, once that's left the spouse's hand, then whatever they do with it is obviously going to be, is going to be affected differently. May mean there's IHT payable later on. I think the odd one is things like the guarantee periods, where it's not really been confirmed exactly how that's going to work, because if guaranteed periods are covered by IHT, then how's that going to be done? Is it going to be monthly? A little bit of IHT taken? Is there going to be a commuted value calculated? I think there's all sorts of questions still around the minutiae of some of these details, which is why I suppose the part of the reason why the regulation's been left till 2027 to have a couple of years to work these things through.
Yeah, indeed. And the issue with death benefits, I'll maybe pass that one over to Martin Chester. Weighing up whether you put in annuity death benefit that might end up being subject to tax, or whether there's a better way of doing it.
It's different worlds to what they used to be. Is you've got joint life, and clearly that's going to be going forward.
Oh dear, I'm afraid your microphone is cutting in and out.
Right. Okay. I'll try that again. So death benefits, obviously joint life could be more in vogue because of IHT exemptions, value protection, and guaranteed minimum payment periods. I know that the revenue are meant to be putting a calculator together in terms of how you value, a pension that's, for example, got a 20-year guaranteed period. Just picking up on what Irana said, my understanding of that, for example, I had this scenario the other day and I got an answer from it. If you had £1 million, for example, in a pension, and you left that to the spouse, clearly that's exempt. But if you said 500,000 to a daughter, for example, our understanding of that is it would use up the nil rate band in that scenario. But I think if you're a beneficiary, you're going to be probably, if an advisor's not looking at death benefits as an option, you're going to be upset that the money's lost on death. So I think death benefits will still be very popular. The shape of them needs to be thought out, and we do need a little bit more around the edges in terms of the revenue and how it develops nearer to 2027 before the legislation goes through.
Yeah, I think it's certainly the case. We've got just 20 minutes left for the last bit and for any questions. So we talked about guaranteed income. The FCA have been talking a lot since Pensions Freedom about whether we should have more innovation in the retirement income space, and there hasn't been a lot. However, I think it's worth discussing how we can use the products that are already there and what solutions are available using those. Martin Chester, how do you bring some of this together, the guaranteed income, alongside perhaps other flexible options as well?
Yes, thank you, Fiona. So just as a background position, if you like, so the deaccumulation opportunity is massively on the radar already. So just to put that in layman's terms, good news of pension plans which were accessed in 24-25, 30.6% of people took regulated advice. So that's a good start. We can only see that figure increasing with the complexities around the new proposals. And actually in annuity world, in terms of will there be an increase in demand for guaranteed income, in 2024, 36% took independent advice on annuities, compared to 27% in the previous year, so that's a positive as well. And we know there's record number of people shopping around for annuities already when they're getting their retirement wake up packs. There's a wall of cash that's going to come into the deaccumulation space over the next 10 years, estimated to be 896 billion. And then you'd have probably picked up stuff like this in the press, but the annuity market, depending which day of the week you read, 6.7 billion, 7 billion is another figure I've heard. That was the size of the market last year. And the reason we mention that's been increasing massively. It proves that George Osborne got it wrong when he said when pension freedoms come in 2015 that no one would ever need to buy an annuity again. So naturally, with this backdrop, the annuity market is predicted to increase by a further 41% by 2029. The other thing I will quickly mention before I come on to that slide, if you think about our parents who were lucky enough to have defined benefit schemes, gold-plated pension schemes, and perhaps some of us lucky enough to have benefited from that as well. People like the attraction of guarantees. Okay, they don't necessarily like the word annuities, so it's perhaps reframing that conversation, and that's probably a more historical thing. But October DWP research showed almost 3/4 of people wanted a guaranteed income from their pension, which of course is what an annuity provides. So if you look at the slide here, you've got the three main options: drawdown, lifetime annuities, and fixed term annuities on retirement. So I'm not going to talk too much about drawdown, because you know that left, right and centre, all about access and flexibility. If you look at lifetime annuities, clearly that's going to provide guaranteed income in exchange for capital for a client, and guaranteed death benefits if selected at outset, and protection from market volatility. And then you've got fixed term annuities in the middle. Sometimes this is a forgotten option, but we've seen a lot of this business coming through, which keeps a client's options open and is more commonly used as a bridging income, or for someone perhaps winding down work, or a top-up income before their state pension kicks in, or some people who are perhaps more risk averse, who just like the attraction of knowing they've got a known return through a guaranteed maturity value through a fixed term plan. But what is clear is all these options have a place in modern retirement planning. No one size will fit all, and they can actually all complement each other, because, you know, I guess the only certainty in modern retirement is uncertainty. And that leads me nicely on to looking at a blended approach. So you'd have seen a lot in the press about this, and clearly if you've got a blended approach, this can help manage portfolio volatility. Some people will call this a fix and flex approach, a hybrid approach, or a layering approach. You'll see a couple of other points there. What I would also add is it can also assist with managing sustainable withdrawal rates. Martin's, flicked up some rates earlier, which were quite attractive in terms of guaranteed income streams. So, if you've got, let's say, 7% for a 65-year-old coming through as a baseline level, perhaps you can take more risk with your drawdown running money, but that money's coming through whatever. The other thing, it does support in evidence in holistic financial planning. So with a view to consumer duty, that's obviously a good thing, but obviously, most importantly, it's right for the client to at least be a consideration. At the very least, it's an opportunity to re-engage with a client, revisit a client's risk profile, and assess their future plans, because I say, that's obviously, what you do in terms of day in, day out as part of your role. And that leads nicely on to that. We've already seen, a lot of partial transfers from drawdown to lifetime annuities, and that's clearly connected with a blended approach, but also with the 4 L's of retirement income. So I'll just bring this alive quickly. So legacy, we've talked about already, and we'll continue to do. Longevity, clearly people are living longer. I did reference some ONS stats earlier. Ever improving medical science, all that sort of stuff. So there's, sustainability of income, potential issues there. But the one I want to pick out is living income. So this is your basic non-discretionary income, such as food and household build money. So I would call that your heating and eating money. On that note, the FCA love the approach of advisors bringing guaranteed income in to skewer that baseline income, be that figure with a client through the fact find is £1,000 a month, £500 a month, whatever the figure is. They like that income stream secured before the client takes any risk with their other money, be it drawdown for discretionary spending and market participation. And clearly, in terms of lifestyle, the more active someone is in retirement, the more income they're going to need. So the meals they have out, the more leisure activities they do. And then lastly, luxury income. So it's almost like the 3 L's within the 4 L's. Advisors have been really good at doing this over the years. So this is to cover unexpended events and what big one-off spending. So that could be the golf club membership, the tennis club membership, the big holiday to Mauritius. Again, that could be probably catered for through your drawdown strategies. But I'll come back to the point about the baseline income being secured. And if you even look at the National Annuity Day recently in October, what that research revealed was people over 50 want stability, comfort, and predictably in retirement also. So I guess, hopefully that gives you a flavour of why guaranteed income is becoming more popular, and it could be combined as part of a wider strategy.
Thank you, Martin. And Martin Lyons, I know that Just have been working on a number of solutions that bring together this idea of flexibility and guarantees. Would you like to just take up some of the last 10 minutes that we've got?
Yeah, sure. Just go to my slides here. Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. I think it is incumbent on providers to introduce things that are going to help, whether it's through the ideas around IHT or that flexibility, and just seeing things in the round as well. And so we briefly mentioned earlier the fixed term scenario, this idea that we could actually, things do change, things will change. We want flexibility, we want security, and that might be on a temporary basis or it might be on a lifetime basis. So in terms of some of the innovations there, what we've got here is, we have these client scenarios where perhaps they want some certainty of capital, but for a period of time, or certainty of capital once they've retired, or you get that gap between retirement and then state pension coming in typically as well. And we know there's those traditional fixed term annuities that can fill that gap. But we've been working on some innovation that goes a little bit beyond that as well. So I'm not going to go through every point on here, but do get in touch if you want to know more. But looking at fixed term investments, so seeing how we might use technology, platform technology, to run some of those types of scenarios whereby we can have that fixed term income, we term it fixed term investment, but actually in a platform environment. So rather than seeing big platform outflows to go and buy guaranteed income, we can still manage it within the platform. This is a really interesting one, because whilst you've got those traditional uses around things like bridging income gaps and so on, you can actually start this one before retirement as well. So because it's an asset of a SIP, our fixed term investment will allow you to actually do that pre-retirement, pre-crystallization. So let's say, for example, you wanted to know what your fund value is going to be, what it's actually going to be at 65 or 67. You could actually start that on an uncrystallized basis and actually have that income being paid into the SIP environment. So again, another little innovation there that's available. So again, lots of tax planning ideas around that once you have reached crystallization as well, because it's on a platform. Maybe you've established that gifting out of normal expenditure, and let's say the rules do change, and you think, well, actually, maybe I could reinvest some of that income instead now, because I can actually change my mind and switch that income off if my circumstances change and the rules change and things like that. So there's that one. And then from a lifetime income perspective, again, and this is very brief, just an excerpt from one of our documents rather than going through a full presentation. But again, looking at a platform based, looking at, as Martin said, whilst you've got essential, non-essential lifestyle, and maybe you do that sort of that part of that as guaranteed income, that blending message goes further and says, what's the impact of that over the longer term? If I put a bit of guaranteed income early doors, what does that do to my fund value? Can I illustrate that? And again, can I run that on a platform too? And here we can see there's a crossover point where putting that guaranteed income early actually creates more assets under management, aka death benefit later on. Hey, and if it's 40% more death benefit, then maybe that's partly answered the problem in some respects, notwithstanding that you probably want to do more than just that. But again, managing these sorts of things on platform so that you can adjust that balance later on, should you wish to do so, and start using some of that income in a different way. So yeah, I think genuinely there are some innovations taking place in the market. I think the tech stack piece around cash flow modeling, the various risk management tools, obviously they're going to be very busy over the next couple of years working out how this fits into assumptions that they're going to have to make going forward. But certainly we're working with a lot of tech stack providers to make sure that we can illustrate these sorts of things, as well as having the product set available too.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm certainly find it hard to believe that it's difficult to manage these things without some form of cash flow going forwards, but I know that not everybody shares that view. We have 5 minutes left, and I'm going to use that to just say what's going to happen a little bit next before I come back to our two presenters. The slides, I know somebody asked earlier, you will all get a copy of the slides. What we're planning to do is, although Martin Lyons has to disappear off to catch a train somewhere, Martin Chester and I are going to hang around for about 15 minutes or so just to try and pick up if there's any questions we haven't dealt with. I know there's a few that I didn't answer, didn't pick up immediately. Once that is over with, Consumer Duty Alliance will send out the copy of the slides to you. You will also get a CPD certificate, so that take a little bit longer to pull together. So you'll get those as well. If we don't get through your questions, either through the chat just now, you've got a couple of options. You can certainly speak directly to your Just or your L&G local business development manager, and I'm sure they'd be happy to answer some of those questions. Or if not, they'll just chuck them back at Martin, and they'll just have to answer them anyway. So they're not going to get away with it. So what I'd like to do is just ask both Messrs. Lyons and Chester to just give me a little summary of today's session. What do you think of all of this useful material? What do you want advisors to walk away with from this session? Martin Chester.
Thank you again, Fiona. Well, I think, with IHT rules changing, it's absolutely clear clients, will obviously be reviewed as you would do normally, and this is very topical, but they might well lean on other assets such as equity release, later life lending, instead of preserving pensions for inheritance. But I'd also add that, retirement advice isn't just about numbers, and I agree with what you said about cash flow planning, absolutely, in terms of stress testing scenarios, all that sort of stuff. But the answer, hopefully, it's become as clear as we can be today, that it perhaps doesn't lie in just one product or one solution to, shall I say, reframe the retirement conversation. The 2027 proposals is an opportunity to have meetings across generations in your client base. And it's clear that, professional financial advice will be central to helping clients with all of this. So I think it's a great opportunity to revisit certain clients and gain new clients, because wider picture, it's still estimated there's 4 million people in the UK who are not yet engaged with an advisor. So where the press is going to get hold of this more and more, this creates more opportunity. So every cloud has a silver lining. Thank you, Martin. And Martin Lyons.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously agree with everything Martin's just said, and it's so important. I mean, I think people will need financial advisors, financial planners more than ever in this world of AI and going online and finding out this information. It's that reassurance bit and making sure that people aren't making knee-jerk reactions, as we said earlier, and with these extra responsibilities that all of us will have, whether we're actually going to be subject to IHT or not, we've still got to find the information, still got to be guided through all of that, and to do the right thing. And so I think it's as Martin said, that ongoing suitability advice becomes more important, revisiting existing clients who you may have made one plan for. Now we're going to have to think of something else. So certainly people have got their work cut out, and I think it's with everything like that, there's always that opportunity to build that trust and to build that relationship with clients.
And of course, it's not just the relationship with the clients, but it's a great opportunity to look at those heirs and how they're going to deal with what's going to come next. Absolutely. That is the end of our time. So I'd like to thank both Martins very much, and also the audience for the questions that came in. I'll just finish by saying that if you haven't already joined the Consumer Duty Alliance, please have a look at the website. Membership is free. And it's very much the profession trying to make the most of itself in order to deliver the best solutions for clients. So we'd love to see you joining us. Thank you very much. I know Martin Lyons has to disappear. Martin Chester and I Goodbye, Martin. We'll go back through some of the questions to see if we've if there's any that we've missed. And those of you who need to disappear, please, thank you very much for coming along. But if there's anybody else that wants more questions, then you can still add things to the chat. Okay, so what have we got here? It's actually, unfortunately, I think it's probably a Martin Lyons question, but if a care provider is a charity, can an annuity care plan be paid direct without tax? I think that is something that Ros Altman was very keen on, but I don't think it actually came to fruition. Martin, do you know?
That's my understanding as well. Obviously, you know, a big attraction of doing an immediate needs care annuities is that the payments made tax-free to the care home. That's standard. With ourselves, it's if they're a registered care home, which is pretty common on that market. But there's not a different rule around charities that I'm aware of.
Yeah, shame. I think I agree. I think there should be going forwards. We also had a question. I think we haven't totally addressed the spouse's pension. If it's a joint annuity and the spouse doesn't take the pension that they're entitled to, again, I think my view is that while we might not have the final legislation, you kind of need to look at the intent. And I think the intent is that the government will allow money that genuinely goes to a spouse to be outside of the IHT taxation regime, but pretty much anything that you do where it ends up either immediately or on second death with somebody else, it will get caught by the tax rules. Martin, if you've got any thoughts on that.
Just thinking that through. I agree what you've said there. Totally, absolutely. Yeah. As it stands, I say this, part of the problem in this is, you know, advisors are revising, but there's still a few bits to come out, but that's certainly the situation as it stands. Yeah.
Okay. And I think the only other thing that was definitely in there were a couple of people, thank you, Mark, and a couple of others mentioned the residence nil rate band.
Yes.
And of course, as with any other addition to the estate, once the estate value exceeds a certain level, then of course you start losing the residence nil rate band, and that has, yes, thank you, that's the point there, Mark, and that obviously will then mean that there's even more tax to be paid at either immediately or later on.
I'll pick up at that. That's correct. I was going to mention that somewhere, but I was probably over my time on a particular bit. But so nil rate ban, quite correct. It reduces for estates worth over 2 million by £1 for every £2 over the threshold, and that's another reason why people might turn on the pension tap to, in that scenario for those clients with high net worth estates, bring their estate value back below 2 million to get back their full residence nil rate ban value to be used towards that calculation. So that's a good point.
I have actually just noticed there was a question about some of the annuity brokers like Retirement Line. They offer up to 75% more income if you use their calculators. And the question was to both of you, but you're stuck with it, Martin Chester. Do you guys do this, or is it just a marketing gimmick?
I think that's a marketing gimmick. I haven't come across that where I've had advisors send me something that a client might have researched independently. Not normally a problem to address that and work around it and improve the situation in a lot of cases. So that's something they're obviously doing. I don't completely know how they're doing that because it's not my experience.
Yeah, I don't. It's not my experience either. But if somebody, I'll maybe look into it and find out if it is possible going forwards.
I'll pick that up with you separately, Irana.
Yes, that's fine. Okay, well, we don't seem to have any more questions coming in, so I'm thinking if we refer back to Emma, and we probably bring the session to a close there. As I said, I'm sure either both Martins or the business development contacts at Justin LNG would be happy to pick up anything that you still feel has not been clarified. Thank you very much, and do enjoy the rest of your Monday.